Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. A very warm welcome to another session of live Q&A with Dr. Saleem. I'd like to remind everyone that you may ask any questions related to the Quran and or Islam in either Urdu or English, your preference of language. However, the answers will be given in English so as we reach a wider array of audiences. Questions are going to be taken in the order that they are received on the WhatsApp group, and we'll be toggling those with the raised hands. So I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. You may also post your questions in chat. So let's take a written question from WhatsApp, and then we'll come over to the raised hands, and we'll keep on toggling. So our first question asks, I have no place to wash feet in the office for wudu, but I go to the office after wudu and in shoes. There is no chance for my foot to get dirty. So in this situation, may I skip the foot wash because doing wet masah on socks causes a smell?
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Masah on socks causes a smell. That's news to me. Masah doesn't mean that you have to wet your sock. You just need to wipe over the sock and in a very symbolic way. And I don't see any reason that that cannot be done. So if you've worn your socks in a way that you've already done your wuzu and then you have put on your socks, then every subsequent wuzu can be done by just doing masah. I think that you need to practice masah a little more. It's not going to produce any stink. I think if you do it the right way, you just need to have a very moderately, even very less wet hand, and you just need to wipe over your socks. I don't think it should be a problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Rafia Khwaja, please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, I wanted to ask you that I have noticed for some time that the Council of Islamic Ideology in Pakistan makes a lot of religious decisions. For example, there's a transgender act going on, and they have gone and said that there are a number of things in this which are against Sharia. It's the same way some laws for women, and they come up, this is against Sharia. I wanted to ask your opinion. Where are they getting the information from? Like, the transgenders are human beings like us, to be treated in a human manner. Women have to be treated properly. So where are these people who are running this council getting their information about Sharia? Is it from the Quran? And who has given them the right to decide for people?
So first of all, we need to understand that as far as the Council of Islamic Ideology is concerned, it is a constitutional body, but it has no role in decision making. It only gives recommendations. So whatever it says is not binding on the parliament in any way, and it's just a recommendatory body. It is just a suggestive body. And as you can clearly see, that the issue of transgenders have not been taken up in the Quran in any way, neither in any hadith. So this is an issue in which ijtihad or independent thinking has to be done, and keeping in view the spirit of religion. So that is what these people do, that on the basis of the spirit of religion, they try to give, they come up with certain answers to problems or issues that people raise. But as I said, these are merely recommendations which they give. They are not at all mandatory for the parliament to adopt. This is an issue which has to be and should be thrashed out as much as possible. And of course, medical opinion also is something very important in this whole, thrashing out, because you see, there are a lot of things which people think that they are, but medically there are other issues as well that have to be discussed. So there is this medical part, and then there is this part in which a person has his or her own will regarding a change of gender, if that transgender situation is such that one of the genes is dominant. So that's another issue, and that can be taken up. But primarily my answer to your question is that these people are forming their own independent opinion on the basis of their own understanding. And whatever they say is just a recommendation, it's just a suggestion given to the parliament, and it is the parliament which is the real body to take decisions in this regard.
But Shehzad, when they talk about Sharia, when you talk about Sharia, you obviously mean Sharia as written in the Quran. Because I read transgender act house, some number of things are against the Sharia when it isn't in the Quran. So how can they come up even suggestions to the parliament?
I mean, this is just a broad term in which they think that when someone says something, it is against the Quran. I mean, it's when they talk about the word Sharia, it doesn't exactly mean that they're talking about something which is written in the Quran. What they are probably implying is that it is against the spirit of the Quran, it is against what Islam stands for. And again, as I said, it is their understanding, it is their viewpoint, which can be correct, which cannot be correct. It goes both ways. So the thing is that it is the parliament of our country, which is the supreme body, which is to pass, any law or legislate in this regard. All that they can do is they can listen to various contesting opinions, and the Council of Islamic Ideology is one such opinion-making body. It's like a think tank, if I can rephrase it. But as far as forming an opinion is concerned about these acts and issues is concerned, it is the competent body here is our parliament.
But our parliament seems to suggest that anything which they can't think for themselves, let's give it to the Council of Islamic Ideology to discuss. And this I couldn't understand.
This is a problem that we have to face because it was constituted by the forums, by the competent forums, and it is part of our government. But as I said, it's the nature of these laws, the way they recommend it, is that they think that various issues which pertain to state and state law, they are given this task to review them and can come up with discussions and conclusions in this regard. And you can argue that this is a needless body or this should not have been created in the first place. But now that it has been created, what I'm just saying is that their role is just recommendatory. And that recommendation is something that is you are free to adopt, and the parliament has to decide.
It is a needless body. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our next question is regarding Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 142. And the verse reads, سيقول السفهاء من الناس ما ولاهم عن قبلتهم التي كانوا عليها قل الله المشرق. Sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
قل لله المشرق والمغرب يهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. So the questioner asks, on the internet, the explanation goes that for the first 10 years of Muhammad, peace be upon him, prophethood, Salah was not obligatory. Prophet and Muslims still used to pray in Mecca, but towards Masjid al-Aqsa. Then the prayers became obligatory at the time of Mi'raj, which was 10 years of prophethood, after 10 years of prophethood. Then Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims migrated to Medina, 13th year of prophethood, and then the Qibla's direction commandment was ordained. So if you read the explanation or tafsir of any reputable scholar like Maulana Maududi or Mufti Taqi Usmani, you will get to know that Muslims used to pray towards Kaaba throughout their Meccan period. When they migrated to Medina as a test, they were told to pray towards Masjid al-Aqsa for 16 or 17 months, and then they were asked to pray towards the Kaaba again. If you could please elaborate in more detail on this above-mentioned verse with some background, especially the parts when was the commanded to point towards Masjid al-Aqsa during prayers was given, and did the prayer become obligatory on the night of Mi'raj?
I think we have discussed this issue many times, that as far as the worship rituals are concerned, which include the prayer, they have been handed down to us from ever since the Prophet Abraham, and even before that, these worship rituals have been constituted. So therefore, thinking that it was that the prayer was made obligatory in a certain night, for example, people think that it was the Ascension night or the Miraj night on which the prayer became incumbent or mandatory is not correct. It was always a part of religion and pre-prophetic. It was part of religion that existed before even the time of the Prophet. So we know that the Quraysh used to pray, and their prayer has been described by the Quran. Similarly, we know that Abu Zar Ghifari said that he, even before he met the Prophet, he was used to pray a couple of years before meeting the Prophet. So prayer is something that was there in this Arab society because it was the remnant of the practice or the tradition of Prophet Abraham, and it has been handed down ever since his times. Now, as far as the direction of Qibla is concerned, we know that in Mecca, the Prophet prayed in line with the Jerusalem mosque. This was because in those times in Mecca, the direction was such that if you pray towards the Kaaba and you pray towards the Jerusalem mosque, the direction is the same. So it was once he shifted to Medina that this became an issue, because if you still prayed in the towards the direction of Jerusalem mosque, this would not be inconsistency, and this would not be you would not be praying in towards the Kaaba, you would be praying towards the mosque of Jerusalem only. So in Mecca this never became an issue, because once you were aligned with one of the mosques, it was as if you were aligned with both of them. It was only in Medina that this came. The Prophet was very worried about it because he wanted his direction to be to the Kaaba. So the Quran tells us that as a trial and test for people, they were told that this is how the issue would be, this is how circumstances would be, that once they go to Medina, they will be still praying towards the Jerusalem mosque, and the Prophet is said to have been very anxious. And so after passing through some months, the Almighty himself changed his direction, and then he said that the reason that the Muslims were allowed to pray, or they were told to pray in this direction, was to test them and see if they follow the command of God, because of course this would have been something which is not very palatable, not easily swallowed, that you pray towards the mosque of Jerusalem in spite of being followers of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this happened for some time, and then as the verse that you just recited, sayaqulu sufahu minan nasi ma wallahu an qiblatihim allati kanat alayha, that the Qibla on which they were, why is it that they have now changed their Qibla, and now they are changing their direction from the mosque of Jerusalem to the mosque of Kaaba. So this was, as the Quran says, that it was a means of test and trial for the people, and so therefore after some time the Almighty actually relieved them of this trial, and he changed the direction of the Qibla, and now once again Muslims were allowed to pray towards the mosque of Kaaba.
Would you know generally when was that time frame? Was it again 16 to 17?
Yeah, it was some time. The Quran has not mentioned the time, and neither has the command been mentioned in the Quran for the Muslims to pray towards the Mosque of Jerusalem. It seems that this was something which was outside the Quran. This was something which was told to the Prophet, and they were doing that. So the direction of prayer in itself is not something that is found within the Quran, but we know that this is something which happened because the Quran is actually referring to it, and it couldn't have been referring to something which never happened. So it does seem that this was the time. This was a certain phenomena which took place, and the real thing which the Quran is stressing here is the purpose of this whole exercise, and the purpose was that whether people submit to the command of God or not. And once again, they're also told that if they used to pray in the direction of the Mosque of Jerusalem for one time, their deeds will not go waste, because what they were doing was they were doing something by following the command of God.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Dr. Saleem. Akram Bhatti, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
सर हम हमेशा सुनते आ रहे हैं कि जी अल्लाह ताला ने इंसान को अशरफुल मखलूकात पैदा किया है। एक कुरान पाक में सूरह इसरा है, उसमें अल्लाह ताला कहता है फदलनाहुम अला कसीर मिम्मन खलकना तफदीला, और फिर आगे जाके सूरह 3 में अल्लाह ताला ने कहा लक़द खलकनल इंसाना फी अहसनि तक़वीम थुम्मा रददनाहु अस्फला साफिलीन। तो यहाँ पर थोड़ा मतलब कंफ्यूजन हो गया कि जो है वो फदलनाहुम अला कसीर मिम्मन खलकना, अल्लाह ताला कुल्ली तो नहीं कहा कि भाई जो अक्सर लोगों से, इसका मतलब कुछ हमसे बेहतर भी अल्लाह की मखलूक है जिनका हमें पता नहीं, क्योंकि वहां देखे ना, वहां कह रहे हैं 95 में कि लक़द ख़लक़ना इंसान फ़ी अहसनि तक़वीम सुम्मा रददनाहु असफ़ला साफ़िलीन। तो इसलिए इसका बता दीजिए कि हमसे बेहतरीन मखलूक हैं अल्लाह ताला ने पैदा की हुई या यही है?
So this is a common misconception that we are ashraful makhluqat. This term has never been used in the Quran in any place. In fact, as you've just rightly pointed out, that in Surah Bani Israel or Surah Isra, the words are Allah kaseeran mimman khalaqna. And we have given you preference or superiority to a lot of my creation. It's not all the creation. So the word ashraful makhluqat is something which has become very famous, but it has, it is farther from the truth, as you can imagine. And as far as Surah Teen is concerned, it is talking about the institution of the ummahs of the prophets of God. So if you read Surah Teen, and you'll find out that the various places which are mentioned there are the places in which the ummahs of various prophets were instituted. For example, we know Teen, Zaitun are the places where the followers of Jesus, they were actually given a certain responsibility. And we have Baradul Amin, in which Prophet Muhammad was given this responsibility. So the word insan in Surah Teen is not a word which is used for all mankind. Laqad khalaqnal insan means these human beings, or these people who were the followers of the prophets of God, they were created in the best of molds. But once they themselves relegated to the worst of individuals, then the law of God is that once person decides, or people decide, that they give up what they have been made responsible of, or they fall into immorality, then the law of the Almighty is that the Almighty also pushes them further. So the words are, it says that Watini wa Zaituni wa Turi Sinina wa Hazal Baladil Amin laqad khalaqna al-insana fi ahsani taqweem, that these people who are born in these areas, which are all the areas in which prophets of God had instituted their ummahs, when they began their life, they were in the best of molds. But summa radadnahu asfala safilin, then they became the worst of the worst when they themselves willed, or they made this intention to lose that moral ground. So basically, that verse has nothing to do with the concept of ashraful makhluqat. It is talking about the institution of various ummahs of prophets of God. And as you rightly said, the verse which is Surah Isra's verse, it clearly says that the Almighty created mankind such that it was made superior to many of God's species, not all of God's species. So it's like a misnomer, the term ashraful makhluqat. It's a cliche. It's something which has become very popular, and it has no basis, I'm afraid.
अभी मैं मिस कर गया, I'm sorry, आपको दोहराना पड़ेगा। ये अल इंसान जो आपने कहा कि उस वक्त के लोग थे, उस वक्त के लोगों में तो अच्छे लोग भी थे, जो ईमान वाले लोग भी थे, या सहाबा कराम भी थे, तो फिर दूसरे लोग भी थे जो मुशरिक भी थे।
That is what the verse is telling us. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, that at these places, when the institution of these ummahs took place, these people who were the followers of these prophets of God, they were created in the best of molds. But later on, the same people, when they decided to practice immorality, or to give up the right course of life, then when they decided, the Almighty pushed them into that. So it's like God punishing them for that. So the word al-insan is not a general word for all mankind. It is used for people who were created by the Almighty as part of the ummahs of these respective prophets.
जज़ाकल्लाह खैर सर, शुक्रिया। मुझे अब याद नहीं आ रहा है, एक और जगह कहीं पर है, मैंने सुबह पढ़ा था कि वहाँ अल्लाह ने मेंशन किया है कि हमने कुछ मखलूकात आपसे बेहतर भी बनाई हैं। मुझे याद नहीं, याद आगे दोबारा पूछूंगा।
You will not find any place in which the words are that all mankind is created such that it is superior to all other species. You will not find this verse anywhere in the Quran.
No, sir. I was saying I read some place where Allah has said that I have created other species better than you. Other species, other creations better than you.
Okay. Right. Maybe you need to find that verse.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Jazakallah.
Thank you. This next question asks, it's about Surah Uzair, verse 30. And the verse begins by saying, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ عُزَيْرُ بْنَ اللَّهِ. So the question asks, in general exegesis, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, scholars have identified him as Ezra. However, Jew historians disagree and say that Ezra was respected but never revered as God's son. Timothy Winter, Abdilul Hakam Murad, thinks angel Metatron is meant by this verse. Could you please throw some light on it and explain it?
Actually, the misunderstanding while people read this verse, which arises generally, is that they think that Ezra or Uzair was regarded by the son, to be the son of God by all Jews, and therefore, this is how they say that if the Quran says that some of the Jews said that he was the son of God, and the Quran is not actually portraying the truth, because Jews never believed Ezra to be the son of God, and as the questioner has rightly said, that they revered him as a prophet and a very respectable person, but never as a son of God. But you see, what the Quran is telling us here is that the Jews of Arabia, it's not talking about the Jews of the Roman Empire or people who lived outside Arabia, had this belief. But as you can see, that it was the Jews of Arabia who had this belief only. And it is in the fitness of things that had this not been the case, the Jews of Arabia would have immediately objected and said that what are you talking about? We never believed Ezra or Uzair to be the son of God. They never did so. So we know that basically this is the belief of the Jews of Arabia only. It's not the belief of the mainstream Jews or the Jews of today or the Jews of the Roman Empire, because remember, they had these people all over in different parts of the world. So the Quran is specifically talking about the belief of the Jews of its own times, which is Arabia.
Thank you for the explanation, Dr. Saleem. The same participant has asked a few other questions, but we're going to toggle them with the raised hands. So Hamza Mahbub, please go ahead.
Sir, my question is that as I born in Muslim family, and I know that to enter in Jannah, it is necessary and the basic foundation to accept that God is one and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last and the final messenger of Allah. But mostly we see in our surrounding, as you also live in the foreign country, and you will also see in your surrounding that many people from other religions live their busy life and don't get proper introduction to Islam and Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Point here to understand is that they don't refuse to accept Islam. Unfortunately, they do not get chance to understand Islam. So my question is that how Allah will treat with these people at the Day of Judgment? Thank you.
I think that the best answer that I have come across such a question is that let God decide, and God will not do any injustice. So as far as his judgment is concerned, it will be immaculate. And if people deserve any concession, any lenience, they would be given that lenience. For example, if the message of the Quran or Islam did not reach them properly, or if it reached them in a distorted way, or maybe the Muslims, they themselves became a hurdle in other people's accepting religion because of their ill ways, all these could be legitimate excuses. So I think that whether non-Muslims would go to paradise or not is a question which God has to, the final answer is to be given to him. But to be honest, the Quran itself has said that there are certain objective standards, and anyone who conforms to those standards is eligible for paradise. And it is not said that only Muslims are eligible for paradise. This is a big misconception. So in verse 62 of Surah Baqarah, you can go home and read it. It explicitly tells us that people in the Lazina Amanu, wal Lazina Hadu, wal Nasara, it is counting all these main denominations which existed in Arabia, was Sabiyun, and the Sabis also. So the people who believe like Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, the Sabis, about them the Quran says that any one of them who believes in God, who believes in the last day, and who does righteous deeds, he or she is eligible for paradise. Unless, of course, we know that in spite of these positive requirements, a person ends up in something which incriminates him and and divests him from this eligibility. For example, in spite of believing in God and the last day and doing righteous deeds, for example, if a person ends up killing someone, then that would divest him from going to paradise. Similarly, if he intentionally denies a prophet of God, that also could be something which could deny him paradise. So intentional denial of the truth is something which, if done by anyone, whether he's a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or belonging to any denomination, is something that can cost him dearly. So I think that people need to pay attention to this verse 62 of Surah Baqarah, which tells us that it's not just Muslims who are going to go to paradise. All those people who conform to these standards, which I just spelled out before you, are eligible for paradise.
Got it, sir. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks, although Quran does not talk about any fallen angels, why has this concept penetrated our traditional exegesis with reference to Harut and Marut?
Well, you see, there are a lot of stories and tales and folk tales, I would say, that have infiltrated in our literature, especially our tafsir literature, and a lot of them are Israelite traditions that we know. And the fact that the Harut and Marut are fallen angels and they were incriminated or they were punished because of doing something is part of our Israelite tradition. You'll find that tradition being mentioned by our exegetes whenever this verse of Surah Baqarah is discussed in an exegesis. And that has actually been the reason that we think that these were fallen angels. Otherwise, the Quran itself has said nothing of the sort. It says, Unzila ala malakaini Haruta wa Marut. It does not say that they were fallen angels at all. It says that they were angels. I mean, the Quran actually designates them as angels and never as fallen angels. So I think in the presence of this very strong statement by the Quran, I mean, all those stories which present a different picture, they just simply cannot be believed.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Yasin Fahad, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. I have a question about verse 12 of Surah Anfal. I was reading the tafsir of Ghamidi Sahib, and in that verse it says that Allah sent the wahi to the angels to help the believers in the battle. So he says that this shows us that the angels have not seen Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way I used to think, that they are able to be present in the, in the presence of Allah's whatever the way He is. But the thing that confused me was, I always thought when we were talking about the shaitan and the Iblis, that he was actually present in the presence of Allah and he was seeing him the way we don't, and he still disobeyed him. But then reading this, that even the angels are not able to see him that way, I just got a bit confused. Like, can you explain it a bit?
Yeah, so I think these are two different occasions. One is that when they are directed to do certain tasks, when the world has already been created and the Almighty sends them this directive through His Wahi. And the other thing is that at the time of creation, all the angels were present, and of course, the Iblis or Satan was also there. And there's no reason to believe that they were not able to, at least think that they are in God's presence. They were absolutely certain. Whether they were able to observe Him or not, the Quran does not mention that in any way. But they were in God's presence, and I do believe that as a result, they were absolutely sure that the directive that was given was given by God. Whether they saw Him or not is something that we just cannot say. But what we can say is that they were absolutely certain that God did address them, and they heard God very well, and they were not confused in any way. So it's not necessary that in that instance also they were able to see God. All that is essential is that at the time of creation they were sure that God is talking to them. So you see, God even spoke to Moses, God spoke to Adam, but talking to someone does not necessitate that you are talking like being in one's presence in such a way that you talk to a person face to face. So it's not essential that, talking face to face is the only mode in which you could address someone.
Okay, so
Is it,
basically they were in absolute certainty that they are in the
they
presence
were
of God.
absolutely certain that God was talking to them. So that is what is implied there.
Okay. And then later on, as you said, now when they get directions from Allah, it's not necessary that they are in His absolute presence. See, they can just get the directions with the wahi, right?
Right.
Okay. Just a follow-up question on another question that was asked in this session was the doing the masa over the socks. When I used to go to work, I did the same thing. I would do wuzu. I will wear my socks and shoes. I go to work, but then I just used to do masa over my leather shoes. I never took off the shoes to do the masa on the socks. So was that correct?
That was correct. I mean, you don't need to take off your shoes at all. So you can just do masa on your shoes whilst when you're wearing them. It's not essential that you take off your shoes.
Thank you. The next question asks, why do scholars consider Azazel as Iblis's original name and consider him to be a fallen angel? Could you please elaborate on this?
I think that this is again a misconception, because I think that he was originally an angel and he was fallen because he disobeyed God. The Quran explicitly tells us that he was kana min al jinn. The words which the Quran says is that he belonged to the genre of jinn kind. He was never amongst the angels. So the Quran has given us the straight answer. So because of the fact that there are biblical narratives maybe which say that he was an angel and his name was Azazel, and so therefore once he disobeyed God, he became a fallen angel. So it's not, I mean, it's just something which is not mentioned by the Quran anywhere. The Quran explicitly says that he belonged to the jinn kind.
So this is a related question to that, and it asks about Uzza, and says that Uzza was one of the names of the fallen angel according to book of Enoch. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah. Enoch, yeah.
Is it possible that Lat and Uzza were made God due to some reference to that?
I think it's all conjecture. If you read them, that Lat, Manat, and Uzza, they were the names of the three famous deities of three tribes of Arabia, and they had them graded as well. They had a certain hierarchy as well. But the fact that he was Azazel in any way and he became Uzza, it's all conjecture, and I think it's highly unlikely that it was the case.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Adil Qureshi, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, Dr.
Walaikum salam.
So, Doctor, if you could correct or confirm my understanding. My understanding is that, as per Ghamidi Sahib, this nation of Gog, Magog, are essentially the people from the children of Noah who have never believed in any prophet that has belonged to since Abrahamic times or his descendants. If I were to, so if I were to build this understanding, then the major nations today that do not believe on any of these Abrahamic prophets, or their majority at least does not believe, would probably be in China or India. And the signs of end of times is that Gog Magog will rise or will try to rise to such an extent that they will try to take over the world. So the rise of China, could it be considered as one of the signs that end of the times is near or end of the world is coming? I don't want to believe in conspiracy theories, but I'm just trying to think of it in that context.
So yes, the Quran does tell us that the end of times, one of the the only sign which the Quran mentions for the end of times is the rise of Gog and Magog. And as you rightly said, that Gog and Magog are the descendants of Javed, who was the third son of Noah. So whether any prophet came to them or not, it could be debatable, because there was a time in which every nation was sent a prophet, and the Quran says, "Likulli ummatin rasul." So before the advent of Abraham, prophets were sent to various communities individually, and there might have been a prophet in their area as well. And also, it does seem that, for example, in Asia, in India, for example, where the Hindus have lived, they have been very, very influenced, very strongly influenced by the creed of monotheism, because their earliest books, which is the Veds, you can read them today also. It is full of monotheism. It has a lot of things which are very similar to the Abrahamic religions as far as monotheism is concerned. So we do think that there could be this effect or influence of either a prophet sent to them, maybe, or a person like Noah and some of the other prophets who could have influenced them. And this could go for the Japhite nations as well, whose descendants are Gog and Magog. But having said that, yes, the rise of the yellow races actually is something of a sign of a day of judgment. But the Quran actually says, "Hatta iza futihat Ya'juj wa Ma'juj," which means that they are able to occupy the world in a manner that they are able to attack the rest of the world in a way that they're the sole conquerors of this world. So this is a time which is yet to arrive. So what we are seeing is the rise of China, or the yellow races, as the Bible calls them. But as far as the fact is concerned, that when will that reach a position that the day of judgment will come, is still maybe a long way off. So all that we are witnessing is a rise, but the rise in itself has a lot of journey to travel as yet. And what exactly is going to be the pinnacle of that point when it is going to reach the top is something that we still cannot say. So all that we can say is that the rise has begun, and in fact it began several years ago. So that's all we can say with certainty.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next question asks, what are your thoughts about the book of Enoch and its account? I'm aware that this book has been removed from Bible's new version.
If I am not mistaken, I think it's one of the Apocrypha, belongs to the Apocrypha. And I cannot give an opinion because I've not read it in the first place. And in the second place, I can say that the Apostolic Fathers, or the Nicene Creed, in which these books were, made to be the what you call the books which are the canonical books. This is something which the Christendom had done. So I cannot say exactly what the nature of that book is, because, as I said, that like many other books, they have removed it from their canonical collections, and they regard it to be among the Apocrypha, which means that they are of doubtful origin to them. So if there is something that we think there is, which is of authenticity, then we need to realize that however much we might regard it to be authentic, their own people, they have disowned these books.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Noshaba Wasim, you're up next. Please go ahead. We're also kind of running short on time, so I would request all the participants to keep their questions concise. Thank you.
Okay. Sir, my question is, if a head cover is not necessary in Islam, then why, while praying, a woman need to cover her head, and when a woman die, there's a part to cover her hair also in coffin? So, because somebody asked me this question, and I don't have any answer for that.
So as far as covering your head is concerned in the prayer, it is again something which is a recommendation. It's not obligatory. It's not mandatory. It's part of the etiquette of standing in the prayer. But it is not that if you don't cover your hair, your prayer is going to be invalid. And secondly, as far as covering the head of a woman who has died, again, this is something which is cultural. Generally, because the shroud in which you cover a body is something in which your whole body is covered. It is naturally covered. I mean, it's nothing that you specially cover the head. It's naturally covered, and only the face is visible. So it is not something of a directive in which you are required to cover the face especially. It's like covering the whole body, because a shroud or a coffin is something which is meant to cover the whole body. And because while covering the whole body, the head comes into that, I mean, it automatically comes, it's part of the body, so you have to cover it as well. There's no separate directive of covering the hair or the head, especially when a woman has died. So I think that is a misconception.
Okay, even for praying, it's not necessary to cover your...
Not necessary. I mean, it's not a mandatory thing. It's highly recommended. But if you don't cover your head for some reason, or because of any reason, it's not that your prayer is going to be invalid.
Mm-hmm. So, sir, like if there is highly recommended, so how you differentiate, like if it's highly recommended in prayer, but not in a daily basis then?
On a daily basis also it's recommended. I mean, it's not mandatory on a daily basis. I mean, in normal circumstances, if you've made up your hair, if you've embellished your hair, then you have to cover your head. But if you've just combed your hair, you just, not styled it in any way, then it's, although it's not mandatory, but it is still desirable. So the desirability is something which is always there. So we're talking about something being mandatory or not.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. The next question asks if you could please provide the references in Quran and Hadith which give us guidance regarding organ donations.
Organ donation is something which is never found in the times of the Prophet. Hence, to look up for references in the Quran and Hadith would be a futile exercise. It is a fairly recent phenomenon in the last 40 or 50 years when organ donation has become a possibility after death. To find out in the Quran and Hadith any such thing would be, you never succeed in that. So what people have done is that because the Quran and the Sunnah have been silent on this issue, so they do ijtihad, which means that they, keeping in view the spirit of religion, they come up with the solution to this problem. And there hasn't been any cogent refusal or rebuttal to this from in any way. So it's a noble act that basically two objections which have been raised against organ donation. One of them is that this is like mutilating the body. You are disfiguring the body. So the answer to this objection is that mutilation and disfiguring is something which depends on your intention. When you're mutilating a body, when you're disfiguring a body, you are disrespecting that body, and we know what disrespect means. But are we disrespecting a body when we are donating an organ? I don't think this is the case. Similarly, the second argument which is given against organ donation is that a person is not the owner of his body, and God is the owner of the body. So what right have we to change our body in any way because it belongs to God? This again is it's a misconception because yes, God has created our bodies, but He has given our bodies in our custody. So therefore, in our lifetime, doesn't it happen that many a time we give up our lives to save someone? We donate organs to save someone. So if we do something in our own lives to save people by even giving away our life, how could it be something which is not possible after we pass away? So these are the only two arguments which have been given, and none of them, in my humble opinion, holds any strength. So therefore, as I said, this is something in which you have to exercise your own sweet judgment, because this is a matter which was never found in the times of Prophet. It's a fairly recent introduction.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Naseem, you're up next. Please go ahead.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम शहजाद भाई।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
मेरी सवाल है, बिल्कुल आपने जो इब्तिदा में जो सेशन में आयत 142 सूरह बकरा का जो जिक्र हुआ था जिसमें क़िबले की तब्दीली के बारे में, तो मेरा सवाल ये है कि जो मुसलमान को बताया कि 16 महीने और 17 महीने जो है वो उस तरफ बैतुल मुक़द्दस की तरफ मुंह करके नमाज पढ़ते थे, तो हिस्ट्री जो हमें बताती है, जो कॉमन एरा की हिस्ट्री है, रिकॉर्डेड हिस्ट्री है, प्री हिस्टोरिक नहीं है ये, कि देयर वर नो बिल्डिंग at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Bakhtasar and the Titus ruin all that lands and ईंट से ईंट बजा दी थी इन्होंने। तो वो कौन सी इमारत थी जिसके तरफ मुंह करके नमाज पढ़ते थे? क्योंकि ये जो मौजूदा मस्जिद अक्सा है ये तो उमय्यद एरा के जमाने में तामीर हुई, तो ये इसको जरा सा एलैबोरेट करेंगे कि क्या है इस सिलसिले में?
Even if the building was not there, the remains of that building were there. So it's not necessary that the building should exist at that time. And yes, you were right that in the aftertide of Prophet Jesus, in which it was twice, the temple was raised down twice, and we know that one of them was in the time of Titus, who actually, or the second attack was in the time of Titus, and the whole of the Jerusalem mosque had been raised down, and it was built much later. So it's not essential that the building itself be present. So the Quran is actually referring to the site, to the actual place where the building is present, was present.
नहीं, अगर ये जो है मान भी लेते हैं, हम एज़म्पशन कर लेते हैं कोई आसार थे उसके, तो ये आसार दाऊद अलैहिस्सलाम और सलमान अलैहिस्सलाम के ज़माने के आसार थे, जबकि इब्राहिम अलैहिस्सलाम तो बहुत पहले के हैं। और कुरान ने भी जो इंडिकेट किया है वो बैतुल अतीक के नाम से काबा को किया है, कदीम घर। तो फिर क्यों हम इसकी तरफ नमाज पढ़ते थे?
This is because the Quran tells us that there was a time in which, in order to test the Bani Ishmael, the Quran gave this directive to them that they should pray for some time towards the mosque of Jerusalem. This is what the Quran actually tells us, that they were praying in the direction of the Jerusalem mosque, and otherwise the change of Qibla doesn't make sense. You see that Tahwilul Qibla, when it says Yaqulu Sufaha'u min an-nasi ma wallahum an Qiblatihim allati kanu alayha, which means that the Qibla on which they were, why is it that they have now changed it to a new Qibla once they were restored to the house of God in Mecca? So it doesn't make sense. The only sense it does make is that there was a time in which Muslims were directed to pray in the direction of the mosque of Jerusalem, or the remnants, or whatever the remains of that mosque were, in order to test their faith and in order to test whether they follow God in this directive or not. And you see the Quran itself refers to this hikmah. It says that وَإِن كَانَتْ لَكَبِيرَةً إِلَّا الَّذِينَ. I mean, it's something of a very grave nature which people would not have come to grips with. But the fact is that because of God's strength, that He could have given such people that happened. So basically, it was a trial for the Bani Ismail that they follow God or not. This is how the Quran actually explains it.
मगर कुरान ने तो कोई डायरेक्टिव नहीं दिया कि आप उस तरफ करके नमाज पढ़ें, यहाँ तो सिर्फ तब्दीली की बात है.
You're right about that. The Quran does not have that directive. But as you can see, that this was something which is given outside the Quran to the Muslims through the Prophet, and that was what they were doing. It doesn't say, the Quran does not speak about that directive at all. And remember that there are a lot of things which are referred to in the Quran which are not actually found in the Quran. I mean, there are so many verses in which God does communicate directly to the Prophet and gives him certain directions. Look at what happened in Surah Tahrim, when the verse is Nabba'ani al-Alimul Khabir, that the Almighty actually revealed to me the secret which you confided with the other wife. And that is something which is not, found in the Quran. I mean, the secret itself is not confided in the Quran, but the Prophet himself said, Nabba'ani al-Alimul Khabir, that he informed me who is knowledgeable and who knows everything. So you see, God communicates with his prophets for his teachings in various ways, and not all of them are always preserved in the Quran.
जी शुक्रिया, जज़ाकल्लाह.
Thank you very much. The next question is about Surah Ash-Shura, verse 50, and the verse says, or grants them a mix of males and females, and causes whomever he pleases to be barren. So the question asks, what is meant by the word mix here? Does it refer to homosexuality or transgender?
No, not at all. It says that either God, you just read the whole verse, the verse says that either God blesses a family with all male or with all females. I mean, either sons are born or either daughters are born, or at times both sons and daughters are born. So it's not in any way telling us. So if you read the verse just before that, you'll find what the Quran is telling us, that God gives life, God gives birth to human life, and he gives birth in such a way that to some he just gives sons, to others he gives daughters, and to others he gives both sons and daughters.
Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Saleem. Yeah. Akram Bhatti, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. सर ये इसरा की 61 में और 6-7 जगह पर है ये जो जैसे हम सारी प्राचीनी है आदम अलैहिस्सलाम की, ये सारे शयातीन जो भी हैं ये इब्लीस की प्राचीनी में है या उसकी सिफा बयान करते हैं? What's the difference? उनका नाम इब्लीस भी नहीं था, उनका नाम अभी आपने कहा एजाजील था, तो ये क्वेश्चन जेब में आता है.
You see, it's not essential to believe that Satan or Iblis is still living and he has this life that is still going on ever since the creation. Obviously, he was the first of the disbelievers. Satan, he was Iblis. But the Quran tells us, Min al-Jinnati wan-nas, that they are these devils, they are found both amongst jinn kind and mankind. So it's like basically the progeny of this Iblis or the descendants of this Iblis that still exist, and they continue to exist, and they belong to the jinn kind. But the Quran specifies that devils and Satans are not just amongst jinn kind; they are amongst mankind as well. So all those who lead people astray by evil whisperings are classified as devils, and some of them are the progeny of Iblis or Satan, and others are from among humankind, and they have adopted the ways of Satan. So it's like following Satan and becoming one of his sort.
वो तो सिफा वाली बात होगी ना, उनकी सिफ्त है, मतलब उनकी शैतान वाली सिफ्त जिनकी बन गई है, तो वो भी शैतान ही शुमार होंगे, ये कहा जा रहा है.
Nas means minal jinnati wan nas. So these people who whisper in the hearts of men, they are found from amongst the jinn kind, and they're also found from amongst mankind. So you see, they exist in both these species.
Because progeny bhi hai वैसे.
Right, progeny is also there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question asks, in some Quranic verses, the argument against idols has been made that idols cannot do anything. If they are true, ask them to do some sort of work. The question is, if an atheist is referring to these verses, they can say that as Muslims, if your Allah is true, then ask him to speak to us or show us some work. How can we respond to that?
Well, this is a question in which you need to tell them that God has his ways to speak to mankind. He does not speak to us directly. He has chosen to speak to the prophets of God. And once the institution of revelation was terminated on the last prophet, he has chosen not to speak to humans directly in any way. The door towards divine revelation has now been closed. So therefore, this is a foolish question that we would ask. A question can only be asked to someone who is in communication to you. So when God is no longer in communication with us, how can we ask this question to him? So we need to understand the scheme of God in this whole scenario. He doesn't speak to human beings just because we want to speak to him. He speaks to human beings when he would like to speak to them. And he chose to speak with human beings in the prophetic period. And after the prophetic period, he no longer has chosen to do so.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Yasin Fahad, please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, I have a question regarding what's mandatory and what's desirable. So, when I talk to my daughters and I tell them not to wear capris, they say, is it mandatory to cover, like till the ankles? And it's hard to say, like I did tell them that it's desirable that you do. And, and they say, what if it's just a little above the ankles? What difference that make? How does that attract men towards women? Like, why is it like that? So it gets really hard when, like it's human nature. The less you, like, if you tell them, okay, you can wear it, then they will go further up and further up. You know what I mean? So I always wanted them to wear the full. So that's why I implemented it that way, that, you should wear full once you have reached the age, whatever, 13, 14 years. And now they question me like this, that if it's not mandatory, then why do you ask us to do it? And I say it's desirable, but they say, what difference does it make? So how should I address it?
We need to revisit this whole strategy of making our children dress up the way we would like to dress up, make them dress up. So this is something which is, again, a thing that we need to resolve by suggesting to them that basically covering one's body parts, regardless of where and to the extent of that covering, is something which is for their own purification. It's not for the attraction of men, because men have been asked to guard their gazes. So it's for the purification of the women themselves. And it is they who would feel more purified if certain parts of the body are covered and others are exposed. But as I said, the details can be looked up because we are running short of time, and I have another session to attend in the next 5 minutes. So I think I'll recommend you either to raise this question again in our next session. I can reply to you in detail. Otherwise, my short reply is that this is not the right approach to educate our daughters regarding religion. I think you need to start off with some of the basics and let them ask this question, and let the need of covering themselves or the question for the lack of it come out of them. And then you recommend that basically the whole purpose of covering yourself to the way the Quran has mentioned it is incorrectly attributed to men being attracted. Quran says zalika azka lakum wa athhar, which means that this is something which is more pure for women themselves, for their own self-purification. So
Yeah, but Dr. Shehzad, it gets so challenging when you're living in the Western world.
Yeah, I know. So you see, you don't need to start from there. So the thing that we do as parents is we start changing the dress of children. No, don't change the dress. Let them wear what they would like to. Change their hearts, change their approach, change their minds, and that will happen automatically. So the approach needs to be revised.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the participants who sent questions during ISC. They will be taken not this time. We'll be taking them next Saturday, inshallah. And that was it for all the questions.